The morning Beatrice Ramsey turned 21, she woke to her mother's screams echoing through their modest boarding house in Fort Yuma, California, accusing her of stealing the silver locket that had belonged to Beatrice's late grandmother. The August heat of 1873 already pressed against the whitewashed walls as Beatrice stood in her nightgown, staring at her mother's twisted face, wondering how the woman who had raised her could believe such a vicious lie. The other boarders gathered in the hallway, their curious eyes boring into Beatrice's skin like the relentless desert sun, and she felt her world crumbling beneath her feet. Her mother, Constance Ramsey, stood with one hand clutched to her chest and the other pointing an accusing finger, her face flushed with what appeared to be genuine distress. Beatrice had never stolen anything in her entire life, had spent years helping her mother run this boarding house after her father died in a mining accident 7 years prior, and now she stood accused of the one crime that would destroy her reputation in this small Colorado river town. "Mother, I did not take your locket," Beatrice said, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "I would never touch your things without permission. You know that." "Lies!" Constance shrieked, her graying hair falling loose from its pins. "You were in my room yesterday afternoon. Mrs. Henderson saw you coming out. The locket was there in the morning, and by evening it was gone. Who else could have taken it?" Mrs. Henderson, a pinch-faced widow who occupied the room next to Constance's, nodded vigorously. "I saw her myself coming out of your room around 3 o'clock. She looked guilty as sin." Beatrice felt her stomach drop. She had been in her mother's room yesterday, but only to deliver fresh linens and collect the washing. She had not touched anything else, had not even looked at her mother's jewelry box. The other boarders murmured among themselves, and Beatrice could see the suspicion growing in their eyes. In a town like Fort Yuma, where everyone knew everyone else's business, an accusation like this could ruin her completely. "I was delivering linens," Beatrice protested. "I did not open your jewelry box. I did not take the locket." "Then where is it?" Constance demanded. "It did not just vanish into thin air. You are the only one who was in my room. You must have taken it to sell. I know money has been tight, but stealing from your own mother? I raised you better than this." The words cut deeper than any knife. Beatrice had never been anything but dutiful, never complained about the endless work of running the boarding house, never asked for new dresses or luxuries. She mended her old clothes until they could be mended no more, went without new shoes for years, saved every penny she earned from doing laundry for other families in town. And now her mother stood before a crowd of neighbors and strangers, calling her a thief. "I want you out," Constance said, her voice cold. "Pack your things and leave my house. I will not harbor a thief under my roof, not even my own daughter." Beatrice felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give these gossips the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She lifted her chin and met her mother's gaze. "If you want me gone, I will go. But I swear to you on Father's grave, I did not take your locket. Someone else is responsible, and I pray you discover the truth before it is too late." She turned and walked back to her small room at the end of the hallway, her bare feet silent on the wooden floorboards. Behind her, she could hear the boarders whispering, their voices carrying that particular tone of scandalized delight that people reserve for other people's misfortunes. She closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to breathe. Her entire body shook with the injustice of it all. How could her mother believe she would do such a thing? How could Constance look at her own daughter and see a thief? Beatrice dressed quickly in her simplest brown calico dress, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. She packed her few belongings into the worn carpet bag that had once belonged to her father. 3 dresses, 2 petticoats, her undergarments, a hairbrush, her mother's Bible that she had been given years ago, and the small tintype photograph of her father in his mining clothes. It was not much to show for 21 years of life, but it was all she had. She added the small leather purse containing her savings, $23 earned from her laundry work, and wondered how long that would last her in a town where no one would hire a known thief. When she emerged from her room, carpetbag in hand, most of the boarders had dispersed. Only her mother remained in the hallway, her face set in hard lines. For a moment, Beatrice thought she saw something flicker in Constance's eyes, something that might have been doubt or regret, but it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "Goodbye, Mother," Beatrice said softly. "I hope you find what you are looking for." She walked past her mother and down the stairs, out into the brutal August morning. Fort Yuma sat at the confluence of the Colorado and Gila rivers, a military town that had grown up around the old fort and the nearby territorial prison. The heat was already oppressive, the kind that made the air shimmer and turned the sandy streets into furnaces. Beatrice had lived here all her life, had never known any other home, and now she walked away from the only house she had ever known with no idea where she would go. She made her way toward the center of town, past the adobe buildings and wooden storefronts, past the saloons that would not open for hours yet, past the general store and the bank and the marshal's office. A few early risers watched her pass, their eyes following her with that particular knowing look that said the gossip had already spread. In a town of barely 2,000 souls, news traveled faster than wildfire. Beatrice found herself walking toward the livery stable at the edge of town, drawn by some instinct she could not name. She needed time to think, needed somewhere quiet away from prying eyes. The stable belonged to old Tom Winters, who had been a friend of her father's. Perhaps he would let her sit in the shade of his barn while she figured out her next step. She was nearly at the stable when a figure stepped out from between two buildings, blocking her path. Beatrice stopped short, her heart hammering. The man was tall and lean, dressed in dusty trail clothes and worn leather chaps, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. A gun belt hung at his hip, the holster tied down like he knew how to use it. For a moment, Beatrice thought he might be a drifter or an outlaw, and she took a step backward. Then he pushed his hat back and she saw his face. He was perhaps 24 or 25, with sun-bronzed skin and clear gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. His jaw was strong and clean-shaven, his dark hair curling slightly at his collar. There was something both dangerous and kind in his face, a contradiction that made Beatrice's breath catch. "You are Beatrice Ramsey," he said. It was not a question. "I am," she said, lifting her chin. "Who are you?" "Zachary Zane," he said, and touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed almost old-fashioned. "I am working at the winter stable. I heard what happened at the boarding house this morning." Beatrice felt her cheeks flush with shame. Of course he had heard. Everyone had heard by now. "Then you know I should not be talking to you," she said stiffly. "I am sure you do not want to be seen with a thief." Something flashed in Zachary's gray eyes. "I did not say I believed you were a thief." Beatrice stared at him. "You did not?" "I have only been in Fort Yuma for 3 weeks," Zachary said, "but I have been around long enough to know the difference between a thief and an honest person. I saw you working at the boarding house, saw how you carried water and linens up and down those stairs from dawn until dark. I saw how you tended to the old veterans who could barely afford their board, how you made sure they had extra food on their plates. A woman like that does not suddenly turn thief." Beatrice felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "You do not even know me." "I know what I have seen," Zachary said simply. "And I know your mother is lying." The words hung in the hot morning air like a challenge. Beatrice looked around quickly, afraid someone might have heard, but the street was empty except for a stray dog nosing through garbage behind the butcher shop. "You should not say such things," she whispered. "You do not understand. My mother would never lie about something like this. She must truly believe I took the locket." "Or she is covering for someone else," Zachary said. His gray eyes held hers, steady and certain. "Or she took it herself and is blaming you for reasons of her own." Beatrice felt a chill run down her spine despite the heat. "Why would she do that? I am her daughter. Why would she want to ruin me?" "I do not know," Zachary admitted. "But I intend to find out, if you will let me." Beatrice did not know what to say. This cowboy, this stranger, was offering to help her when her own mother had cast her out. It made no sense. Why would you do that? What is it to you if I am blamed for something I did not do? Zachary was quiet for a moment, and Beatrice saw something complicated pass across his face. My sister was accused of stealing once, he said finally. Back in Texas, where I grew up. She worked in a big house for a wealthy family, and when some jewelry went missing, they blamed her. She was 16 years old. They had her arrested, threw her in jail. It took 3 months before they found the real thief, one of the family's own sons who had been gambling away his inheritance. By then, my sister had lost her position. Her reputation was destroyed, and she could not find work anywhere. She ended up marrying a man who treated her poorly just to have a roof over her head. I was too young then to help her, but I am not too young now. I will not stand by and watch another innocent woman be destroyed by a lie. Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes again. I do not know what to say. Say you will let me help you, Zachary said. Say you will trust me to find the truth. Beatrice looked at him, this tall cowboy with his steady gray eyes and his quiet certainty, and felt something shift inside her. She had no reason to trust him, no reason to believe he could do what he claimed, but she had no one else. Her mother had turned against her, and the whole town would follow Constance's lead. What did she have to lose? All right, she said softly. I will let you help me, but I do not want charity. If you prove my innocence, I will find a way to repay you. A small smile touched Zachary's lips. I do not want repayment. I want justice. There is a difference. He picked up her carpet bag before she could protest and gestured down the street. Come on. Tom Winters has a small room above the stable that he is not using. You can stay there while we figure this out. It is not much, but it is clean and private. Beatrice followed him toward the livery stable, acutely aware of the curious glances from windows and doorways. Let them look, she thought. Let them whisper. Soon enough, they would know the truth, and they would have to swallow their gossip along with their lies. Tom Winters was a grizzled old man with kind eyes and hands gnarled by decades of hard work. When Zachary explained the situation, Tom simply nodded and led Beatrice up the narrow stairs to a small room that smelled of hay and leather. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the corral. It was sparse, but it was more than Beatrice had hoped for. You can stay as long as you need, Tom said, his voice gruff with emotion. Your father was a good man, Beatrice. He would have wanted someone to look after you. Do not worry about payment. You can help around the stable if you want to earn your keep. Thank you, Beatrice said, her voice thick. I will not forget this kindness. After Tom left, Zachary lingered in the doorway. Get some rest, he said. I am going to do some investigating. I will come back this evening and tell you what I have learned. What are you going to do? Beatrice asked. Ask questions, Zachary said. Watch people. Listen. You would be surprised how much you can learn just by paying attention. He paused, his hand on the doorframe. Your mother had to have a reason for accusing you. Either she truly believes you took the locket, which means someone convinced her of it, or she is deliberately lying, which means she has something to hide. Either way, the truth is there. We just have to dig it up. After he left, Beatrice sank down on the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to cry. She cried for her mother's betrayal, for the injustice of the accusation, for the father she still missed with an ache that never quite went away. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she washed her face in the basin and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. Her reflection showed a young woman with dark brown hair and hazel eyes. Unremarkable features made interesting by an expression of determination. She would not let this destroy her. She would find the truth, with Zachary's help or without it, and she would clear her name. That evening, as the brutal heat finally began to ease into the cooler temperatures of desert night, Zachary returned. Beatrice heard his boots on the stairs and met him at the door. He looked tired, his shirt dusty, and his face drawn, but there was a spark in his gray eyes that told her he had learned something. Well? She asked, unable to keep the eagerness from her voice. Zachary pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair. I spent the day talking to people at the boarding house. Most of them are convinced of your guilt, I am sorry to say. But I learned some interesting things. Did you know your mother has been making regular deposits at the bank for the past 6 months? Beatrice frowned. Deposits? That makes no sense. The boarding house barely brings in enough to cover expenses. Mother is always complaining about money. Exactly, Zachary said. So where's this extra money coming from? I talked to Samuel Price at the bank. He would not tell me much, but he did let slip that your mother has been depositing significant sums. $20, $30 at a time. Beatrice felt her mind racing. $20 or $30 was a fortune for someone running a small boarding house. Could she have been selling things? Jewelry, perhaps? That was my thought, too, Zachary said. I went to the pawn shop on 3rd Street. The owner, a man named Kowalski, was not very cooperative at first, but I can be persuasive when I need to be. He finally admitted that your mother had been bringing him items to sell over the past several months. Jewelry, mostly. Small pieces, nothing too valuable individually, but it adds up. Beatrice sat down hard on the bed, her legs suddenly weak. She has been selling jewelry? But the only jewelry she owns is what father gave her. And grandmother's locket, of course. What if the locket is not missing at all? Zachary said quietly. What if your mother was planning to sell it, like she sold the other pieces, but she needed an excuse for why it was gone? If she claimed you stole it, no one would ask questions about where it went. The idea was so monstrous that Beatrice could barely process it. But why would she do that? Why would she throw me out just to cover up selling some jewelry? If she needed money that badly, she could have just told me. We could have found another way. Zachary crouched down in front of her, his gray eyes level with hers. Maybe she is ashamed. Maybe she is in debt to someone and does not want you to know. Maybe she has been taking money from the boarding house funds and needed to cover the shortfall. I do not know yet, but I will find out. I promise you that. Beatrice looked into his face, so close to hers, and felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the investigation. He smelled of leather and horses and the sage that grew wild in the desert, a clean, masculine scent that made her suddenly aware of how small the room was, how alone they were. She saw him notice the same thing, saw his eyes darken slightly, and his breath catch. He stood up abruptly, putting distance between them. I should go. I will keep digging tomorrow. In the meantime, stay here and stay out of sight. The less people see you, the less they can talk. After he left, Beatrice lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of everything she had learned. Her mother had been selling jewelry in secret, making deposits at the bank that should not exist, and then had accused her own daughter of theft. None of it made sense, and yet Zachary's theory had a horrible kind of logic to it. If Constance needed money badly enough, if she was desperate or ashamed or afraid, she might do something drastic. But to throw away her own daughter to cover it up? What could possibly be worth that? The next morning, Beatrice woke to find the sun already high and the stable below alive with activity. She washed and dressed quickly, then made her way downstairs to find Tom Winters mucking out stalls. He looked up when he saw her and gestured toward a bucket of water and some rags. If you are looking to help, you can clean the tack, he said. It all needs a good oiling. Zachary had to ride out to one of the ranches this morning to help with a difficult foaling, so it is just you and me today. Beatrice spent the morning cleaning bridles and saddles, her hands soon black with leather oil, and her arms aching from the repetitive work. It felt good to be useful, to focus on something simple and physical that kept her mind from circling endlessly around her troubles. Tom worked quietly beside her, occasionally offering advice about technique or telling stories about horses he had known. He did not mention her mother or the accusation, and Beatrice was grateful for the simple normalcy of it all. Around midday, a commotion in the street drew their attention. Beatrice looked out to see a crowd gathering near the general store, voices raised in excitement or alarm. Tom wiped his hands on his pants and went to investigate, leaving Beatrice alone in the stable. She continued working, but her hands had started to shake. Something was happening, something that involved her. She could feel it. Tom returned a few minutes later, his face grim. "You had better sit down, girl." Beatrice set down the bridle she had been cleaning. "What is it? What has happened?" "They found the locket," Tom said. "In the river, caught in some driftwood near the old ferry crossing. One of the children found it this morning while fishing." Beatrice felt her heart leap. "Then that proves I did not sell it. If it was in the river all this time, I could not have taken it." But Tom was shaking his head. "That is not what people are saying. They are saying you must have thrown it in the river to get rid of the evidence, that you took it and then got scared when your mother made such a fuss. Mrs. Henderson is telling everyone she saw you walking toward the river 2 days ago that you must have tossed it then." Beatrice wanted to scream. Every piece of evidence that should have cleared her name was being twisted to make her look more guilty. "I did walk toward the river," she said. "I was taking laundry down to wash in the shallows, like I do every week. Mrs. Henderson knows that. Everyone knows that." "I know," Tom said gently, "but people believe what they want to believe, and right now they want to believe you are guilty. It makes for better gossip." Beatrice sank down on a bale of hay, feeling defeated. How could she fight this? How could she prove her innocence when every fact was being interpreted in the worst possible light? She thought of Zachary out at some distant ranch, unaware that the situation had just gotten worse. She thought of her mother, who should have been defending her but instead had started this whole nightmare. "I did not do it," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "I swear to you, Tom, I did not take that locket." "I believe you," Tom said, "and Zachary believes you. That is two people who know the truth. That is a start." Zachary did not return until late afternoon, his horse lathered and his clothes covered in dust and worse things. He had clearly been working hard at the difficult birth, and Beatrice could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. But when Tom told him about the locket being found, all traces of weariness vanished. His face went hard and his eyes sharp. "The river," he said slowly. "That is interesting." "How is that interesting?" Beatrice asked. "Everyone thinks I threw it there to hide my crime." "Think about it," Zachary said. "If you had actually stolen the locket intending to sell it, why would you throw it in the river?" "That makes no sense. You would have sold it and kept the money, or hidden it somewhere safe to sell later. Throwing it in the river destroys its value completely. It only makes sense if someone wanted the locket to disappear entirely, not to profit from it." Beatrice felt a flicker of hope. "So you think someone else threw it in the river?" "I think your mother threw it in the river," Zachary said flatly. "Or had someone else do it for her. She never intended to sell that particular piece. She just wanted it gone, and she wanted you blamed for its disappearance." "But why?" Beatrice asked desperately. "Why would she hate me so much? What did I do to deserve this?" Zachary shook his head. "I do not think this is about hate. I think this is about desperation. Your mother is hiding something big enough that she is willing to sacrifice your reputation to keep it secret. I need to find out what that is." Over the next several days, Zachary continued his investigation, while Beatrice remained hidden in the stable. He talked to merchants and shopkeepers, to the boarders at the house, to anyone who might have information about Constance Ramsey's activities. He learned that she had been meeting regularly with a man named Edgar Sutton, a gambler who ran poker games in the back room of one of the saloons. He learned that she had been asking questions about the stage schedules to San Francisco, as if she was planning a trip. He learned that 2 of her boarders had left suddenly last month, claiming they had not received the level of service they had paid for. Beatrice listened to each new piece of information and tried to fit it all together like a puzzle. Her mother meeting with a gambler, planning a trip to San Francisco, having unhappy boarders who left. None of it painted a picture of the woman Beatrice thought she knew. Her mother had always been strict and sometimes cold, but never dishonest, never cruel. Or had Beatrice simply been blind to her true nature all these years? One evening, as they sat in the small room above the stable with the window open to catch the breeze off the river, Zachary told her what he had learned that day. I talked to Edgar Sutton. It took some convincing and a few dollars, but he finally told me the truth. Your mother has been gambling, Beatrice. She has been coming to his games for over a year, and she has lost a substantial amount of money. She owes him nearly $300. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. $300 was more money than the boarding house made in half a year. How is that possible? She never had that kind of money to lose in the first place. She has been using the boarding house funds, Zachary said. The money the boarders paid for their rent and meals. She would take it to the poker games, thinking she could win big and pay it all back. Instead, she kept losing. Eventually, she ran out of money to gamble with, so she started selling her jewelry. But that was not enough either. Sutton has been pressuring her for payment, threatening to tell everyone in town about her gambling habit if she does not pay up. The pieces were finally coming together, and the picture they formed made Beatrice sick to her stomach. So she threw me out to distract people from her own crimes. If everyone was focused on me being a thief, they would not notice that she was the one stealing from her own boarders. Exactly, Zachary said. And if she could make you look bad enough, maybe she thought you would leave town entirely. One less person who might discover what she had been doing. Beatrice stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening desert. The injustice of it all pressed down on her like a physical weight. Her mother had not just accused her falsely. She had deliberately destroyed her daughter's life to save herself from embarrassment and consequences. All those years of working side by side, all those times Beatrice had sacrificed and saved and done without, and this was how Constance repaid her. She felt Zachary come to stand beside her. I know this is hard, he said softly. Learning that your mother is not the person you thought she was. But at least now we know the truth. Now we can clear your name. How? Beatrice asked. Even if we tell people about my mother's gambling, they will just say I am making up lies to cover my own guilt. Mrs. Henderson saw me in my mother's room. The locket was found in the river near where I do laundry. All the evidence still points to me. Not all the evidence, Zachary said. We just need one piece that points conclusively to your mother. One thing that cannot be explained away or twisted. And I think I know how to get it. He explained his plan, and Beatrice listened with growing amazement and fear. It was risky, perhaps even dangerous, but it was also their best chance at proving the truth. If it worked, her name would be cleared, and her mother's deception would be exposed. If it failed, things could get much worse. Are you sure about this? She asked. Zachary met her eyes in the twilight. I am sure, but I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that? Beatrice looked at him, this cowboy who had appeared in her life at its darkest moment and offered her hope when she had none. Over the past week, she had come to know him not just as a helper, but as a friend. She had seen his kindness in how he treated the horses, his patience in how he dealt with difficult customers, his integrity in how he refused to take shortcuts even when no one was watching. She had seen him laugh at Tom's terrible jokes and watched him sit quietly with an old cavalry horse that was dying, offering comfort in its last hours. She had learned that he had drifted west from Texas after his sister died, giving birth to her fourth child, that he was searching for something he could not quite name, that he believed in justice with a fierce certainty that both inspired and frightened her. And somewhere in the midst of all that knowing, she had started to feel something more. Something that made her heart beat faster when she heard his step on the stairs, that made her hands tremble when he stood too close, that filled her dreams with images of his gray eyes and the curve of his mouth when he smiled. It was foolish, perhaps, to develop feelings for him when her whole life was in chaos. But the heart, she was learning, did not wait for convenient times. I trust you, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The next morning, Zachary went to see Constance Ramsey at the boarding house. Beatrice waited in agony at the stable, pacing the small room until Tom finally ordered her downstairs to help with the horses just so she would stop wearing out the floorboards. She groomed and brushed and mucked stalls with frantic energy, trying not to imagine all the ways Zachary's plan could go wrong. Zachary had decided to confront Constance directly, but with a twist. He would tell her that Edgar Sutton had approached him, claiming that Constance owed him money and asking if Zachary knew where she might have gotten funds to pay her debt. He would pretend to be sympathetic, would suggest that perhaps Beatrice had been right all along and Constance had been hiding something. He would watch her reactions carefully, would push her buttons in just the right way to make her reveal the truth, and he would have a witness, someone respectable who could testify to what was said. That witness was Reverend Michaels, the minister of the small Presbyterian church where Beatrice's family had attended services. Zachary had approached him the day before and explained everything, and the Reverend had agreed to help. He had known Beatrice since she was a child and did not believe she was capable of theft. He was willing to be present during the conversation with Constance, ostensibly to offer spiritual counsel about the situation with her daughter, but really to observe and report. It was afternoon when Zachary finally returned. Beatrice saw him coming from the window and flew down the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. Tom and several customers were in the stable, so she had to wait in an agony of impatience while Zachary tended to his horse and made polite conversation. Finally, he caught her eye and nodded toward the door. They walked out into the brutal midday heat, around to the back of the stable where a few scraggly trees provided minimal shade. "Well?" Beatrice asked the moment they were alone. Zachary's face was grim, but his eyes held a fierce satisfaction. "We got her. She confessed everything." Beatrice felt her knees go weak. "She confessed? To Reverend Michaels?" "To both of us," Zachary said. "I told her what I knew about her gambling and her debt to Sutton. She tried to deny it at first, but I kept pushing. I told her Sutton was threatening to go to the marshal if she did not pay, that he was tired of waiting. She started to panic, started talking about how she never meant for things to go so far, and then Reverend Michaels asked her directly if she had lied about you stealing the locket. She broke down completely. She admitted everything. Beatrice had to sit down on a nearby crate, her whole body shaking. What did she say? Exactly? Zachary crouched in front of her, his hands gentle on her knees. She said she threw the locket in the river herself the morning before she accused you. She was planning to claim it had been stolen and collect on an insurance policy she had taken out on her jewelry. But the insurance agent asked too many questions, wanted to involve the marshal. She panicked and decided to blame you instead. She thought if everyone believed you were the thief, no one would look too closely at her own finances. She thought you would just leave town and it would all blow over. She was willing to destroy my life to save her own reputation, Beatrice said, and her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. She was desperate and foolish, and she made terrible choices, Zachary said. But the important thing is that Reverend Michaels heard the whole confession. He is a respected man in this town. When he tells people what your mother admitted, they will have to believe him. What happens now? Beatrice asked. Now we go to the marshal, Zachary said. We tell him everything, and we let the law sort it out. Your mother will likely be arrested for fraud and theft from her boarders. She will have to face the consequences of what she has done. But you will be cleared completely. Everyone will know you are innocent. Beatrice should have felt relief, should have felt vindicated, but all she felt was a deep, aching sadness. Her mother was going to jail. The woman who had raised her, who had taught her to read and sew and keep a house, was going to be arrested like a common criminal. And she deserved it. Beatrice knew she deserved it. But that knowledge did not make it hurt any less. Zachary must have seen something in her face because he pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest while she finally let herself grieve. She cried for the mother she had thought she had, for the relationship that had been built on lies, for the innocence she had lost. She cried until his shirt was soaked with her tears, and her throat was raw, and her eyes were swollen. And through it all, he held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. When she finally pulled away, embarrassed by her outburst, Zachary wiped her tears with his thumbs and looked at her with such tenderness that her breath caught. "You are the strongest woman I have ever met," he said. "You have been through hell this past week, and you have not broken. You are going to survive this, Beatrice. You are going to thrive." "I do not feel strong," she admitted. "I feel broken and lost, and so angry I can barely breathe." "That is all right," Zachary said. "You are allowed to feel those things. But you are still here, still fighting. That is strength." They went to the marshal's office together, with Reverend Michaels meeting them there. Marshal Garrett was a fair man but set in his ways, and at first he was skeptical of their story. But Reverend Michaels recounted the entire conversation with Constance, holding nothing back, and gradually the marshal's expression changed from skepticism to shock to anger. "You are telling me that Constance Ramsey made a false accusation against her own daughter just to cover up her gambling debts?" he said. "That is a serious crime, Reverend. Are you absolutely certain of what you heard?" "I am certain," Reverend Michaels said firmly. "Mrs. Ramsey confessed everything in my presence and in the presence of Mr. Zane. She admitted to throwing the locket in the river herself and deliberately framing her daughter. She admitted to stealing money from her boarders to fund her gambling habit. She expressed no remorse for what she had done to Beatrice, only concern for her own situation." The marshal looked at Beatrice, and she saw something like pity in his eyes. "I am sorry, Miss Ramsey. I should not have been so quick to believe the accusation. I should have investigated more thoroughly before allowing your name to be dragged through the mud." "You believed what everyone else believed," Beatrice said quietly. "I do not blame you for that. I just want my name cleared." "It will be," the marshal promised. "I will arrest your mother this afternoon and make a public statement about what really happened. The whole town will know you were innocent." Constance Ramsey was arrested that same day, taken from the boarding house in shackles, while the remaining boarders watched in shock. The news spread through Fort Yuma like a flash flood, and by evening everyone knew the truth. The women who had whispered about Beatrice the thief now whispered about how terrible they felt, how they should have known better, how poor Beatrice had suffered such an injustice. Mrs. Henderson, who had been so certain she saw guilt in Beatrice's face, now claimed she had always had doubts about Constance's story. The hypocrisy made Beatrice sick, but Zachary just laughed. "People will always try to be on the winning side," he said as they walked along the river in the evening coolness. "They cannot help themselves, but at least now they know the truth. That is what matters." Beatrice looked out at the muddy water where her grandmother's locket had been found, where her mother had thrown it in a desperate attempt to hide her crimes. "What will happen to her?" she asked. "To my mother?" "She will go to trial," Zachary said. "She will likely be sentenced to time in the territorial prison. The boarding house will be sold to pay off her debts and compensate the boarders she stole from. It will not be easy for her." "Good," Beatrice said, and was surprised by the venom in her own voice. "She deserves whatever she gets." Zachary took her hand, his fingers warm and rough against hers. "You do not have to forgive her." "Not now. Maybe not ever. What she did was unforgivable. But do not let her poison you with bitterness. Do not let her take away your capacity for joy and trust. That would be letting her win." Beatrice looked at their joined hands and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "When did you become so wise?" "I have made enough mistakes to learn a few lessons," Zachary said with a small smile. "I am no sage, Beatrice. I am just a cowboy who has seen some hard things and come out the other side." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold. The desert was beautiful in the evening. Beatrice thought. All the harsh edges softened by the fading light, the colors rich and deep. She had lived here all her life, but had never really appreciated it until now, until she had almost lost everything and learned to see the world through new eyes. "What will you do now?" Zachary asked. "Where will you go?" Beatrice had been thinking about that question for days. The boarding house would be sold, so she could not go back there. She had a little money saved, but not enough to start over somewhere new. She could find work as a laundress or a cook, could probably make enough to support herself. But the thought of staying in Fort Yuma, where everyone knew her story, made her stomach clench with anxiety. "I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose I should go somewhere new, somewhere I can start fresh. Maybe San Francisco or Denver. Somewhere big enough that no one will know me or care about my history." Zachary stopped walking and turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. "Or you could stay here, with me." Beatrice's heart gave a great thump against her ribs. "With you?" "I have been thinking," Zachary said, and she could see the nervousness in the set of his shoulders, the way he was not quite meeting her eyes. "Tom wants to retire soon, and he has offered to sell me the stable. I have some money saved, enough for a down payment. I could make a good living here, a respectable living. And I could use a partner, someone smart and hardworking who knows how to run a business." "A business partner," Beatrice said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. Zachary finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her breath stop. "A partner in every sense. A wife, if you will have me." For a moment, Beatrice could not speak. She stared at him, at this man who had come into her life like a whirlwind and turned everything upside down, who had believed in her when no one else would, who had fought for her and stood by her and made her feel less alone. She had known him for barely 2 weeks, and yet she felt like she had known him forever. She had never believed in love at first sight, had always thought such things belonged in dime novels and fairy tales. But what else could explain this feeling in her chest, this certainty that if she let him walk away, she would regret it for the rest of her life? "You want to marry me?" she asked, needing to hear him say it again. "I do," Zachary said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are brave and kind and honest, and you deserve someone who will stand by you no matter what. I want to be that person, Beatrice. I want to build a life with you, here in Fort Yuma, or wherever you want to go. I am not much, just a cowboy with some savings and a lot of dreams, but I promise you, I will work hard every day to make you happy. I will never lie to you, never betray you, never give you reason to doubt me. You have been hurt enough by the people who should have loved you. Let me show you what real love looks like." Beatrice felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but this time they were not tears of grief or anger. They were tears of hope, of joy, of overwhelming emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Zachary's face split into a grin so wide and genuine that Beatrice could not help but smile back. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, and when he set her down, he kissed her. It was her first kiss, sweet and gentle and full of promise, and Beatrice felt her whole world shift on its axis. Everything that had come before, all the pain and betrayal and loss, suddenly felt like it had led her to this moment, to this man, to this new beginning. They were married 3 weeks later in Reverend Michaels's small church, with Tom Winters standing as witness and half the town in attendance. Beatrice wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair that Zachary had picked that morning. She had no family present, her mother still awaiting trial in the territorial prison, but she found she did not miss the absence. She had Zachary now, and Tom, and the Reverend who had stood up for her when it mattered. She had a new family, one built on truth and trust rather than obligation. The trial of Constance Ramsey took place a month after the wedding. Beatrice attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom with Zachary's hand tight around hers. She listened to the evidence, heard her mother's weak attempts at justification, watched as the judge sentenced Constance to 3 years in prison for fraud and theft. When it was over, her mother was led away in chains, and Beatrice felt nothing but a hollow sort of relief. It was finished. The chapter of her life that included her mother was closed, and she could finally move forward. Zachary bought the livery stable from Tom Winters, and Beatrice threw herself into helping him run it. She discovered she had a talent for managing the books and dealing with customers, and soon the business was thriving. They added a small tack shop that sold saddles and bridles and other equipment, and Beatrice learned leatherworking from Tom before he retired to live with his daughter in Phoenix. She found she loved the work, loved the smell of leather and oil, loved the satisfaction of creating something useful with her own hands. The first year of their marriage was not always easy. They were learning each other, learning to navigate the small conflicts and compromises that all couples face. Zachary had a stubborn streak that sometimes clashed with Beatrice's determination, and there were moments when they argued about money or business decisions or whose turn it was to cook dinner. But they always worked it out, always talked through their problems instead of letting resentment fester, and the good moments far outweighed the difficult ones. Beatrice loved waking up next to Zachary each morning, loved the way he kissed her forehead before getting out of bed, loved how he brought her coffee while she was still blinking sleep from her eyes. She loved watching him work with the horses, his patience and gentleness with even the most difficult animals. She loved his laugh, deep and genuine, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She loved how he never treated her like she was fragile or helpless, how he respected her opinions and listened when she spoke. And Zachary loved her right back, with a fierce devotion that sometimes took her breath away. He loved how she sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs her father had taught her. He loved her determination and her courage, the way she faced every challenge head on. He loved her kindness, how she always had a gentle word for nervous customers or frightened horses. He loved the way she fit perfectly against his side when they sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. In their second year of marriage, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. She had always wanted children, but the memory of her own mother's betrayal haunted her. What if she was not a good mother? What if she made the same mistakes Constance had made? Zachary held her while she cried out her fears, and then he made her look at him. "You are nothing like your mother," he said firmly. "You are kind and honest and strong. You will be an amazing mother because you already know exactly what not to do, and I will be right there beside you every step of the way. We will figure this out together, like we figure out everything else." Their son was born in the spring of 1875, during a late afternoon rainstorm that broke the desert heat and filled the air with the smell of creosote. They named him William Thomas Zane, William after Beatrice's father, and Thomas after Tom Winters, who had been so kind to them. He was a healthy baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the moment Beatrice held him, she felt a love so overwhelming it was almost frightening. This tiny person depended on her completely, trusted her absolutely, and she vowed she would never betray that trust the way her mother had betrayed hers. Zachary was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son. Beatrice would often find them in the stable, William sleeping in a basket while Zachary worked, or later, when the baby was older, perched on his father's shoulders while Zachary showed him the horses. He sang lullabies in the evening and told stories, and he changed diapers without complaint, even though most men of their time considered such work beneath them. 3 years later, their daughter was born. They named her Sarah Grace, and she had her mother's hazel eyes and a stubborn streak that made them both laugh. Beatrice loved watching her children grow, loved seeing their personalities emerge. William was gentle and thoughtful, already showing signs of his father's patience with animals. Sarah was fierce and curious, always getting into mischief, always asking questions. They were everything Beatrice had never dared to hope for, proof that she could break the cycle of her own upbringing and create something better. The business continued to thrive. Zachary and Beatrice expanded the stable, adding more stalls and hiring help as needed. They built a reputation for fair dealing and quality work, and people came from miles around to buy their tack or board their horses. They saved money carefully, invested in property, and slowly built themselves a comfortable life. It was not wealthy by any means, but it was secure and honest, and that meant everything to Beatrice. 5 years after her conviction, Constance Ramsey was released from prison. She had served her full sentence with no early release, and she emerged a changed woman. She was thinner and grayer, with a haunted look in her eyes. She came to the stable one morning, and when Beatrice saw her standing in the doorway, she felt her whole body go cold. "Hello, Beatrice," Constance said quietly. "I know I have no right to be here. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I needed to see you to tell you how sorry I am for what I did." Beatrice stood frozen, a leather punch in one hand and William clinging to her skirts. She had not seen her mother in 5 years, had tried not to think about her, and now here she was, looking old and broken and impossibly small. Zachary appeared at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. "I think you should leave," he said, his voice hard, but Beatrice put a hand on his arm. "No, let her speak." Constance looked at her grandson with tears in her eyes. "He is beautiful. He looks like your father." "Do not," Beatrice said sharply. "Do not talk about my father. You have no right." "You are right," Constance said. "I have no rights here. I gave those up when I lied about you, when I put my own selfishness above my daughter's well-being. I was a terrible mother, Beatrice. I was weak and foolish, and I let gambling become more important than anything else. I destroyed my life and nearly destroyed yours. I do not expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, truly sorry, and that I will carry the guilt of what I did to you for the rest of my life." Beatrice looked at her mother, at the woman who had given birth to her and raised her, and then thrown her away like garbage. She felt no love, no warmth, no connection. That had all been burned away by betrayal, but she also felt no hatred, no desire for revenge. Constance was just a sad, broken woman who had made terrible choices and paid the price. "I cannot forgive you," Beatrice said. "Not today, maybe not ever. What you did was unforgivable. But I am not going to carry hatred for you in my heart. That would only hurt me, and I have worked too hard to build a good life to let you poison it now. You need to leave Fort Yuma, Mother. You need to go somewhere else and start over because you cannot do that here. There is nothing for you in this town anymore." Constance nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I understand. I am going to San Francisco. I have a cousin there who has agreed to take me in. I will not bother you again." She paused at the door. "I am glad you found happiness, Beatrice. I am glad you found someone who treats you the way you deserve to be treated. I am sorry I could not be that person for you." After she left, Beatrice stood very still, holding William close. Zachary wrapped his arms around both of them, and she leaned into his warmth and strength. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I am," Beatrice said, and realized it was true. Seeing her mother had not destroyed her, had not reopened old wounds. It had simply confirmed what she already knew. That chapter of her life was over. She had moved on, had built something real and lasting, and nothing her mother did or said could take that away. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. William grew into a thoughtful young man who had inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's head for business. Sarah became a force of nature, fearless and bright, always pushing boundaries and asking questions. When William was 12 and Sarah was 9, they were blessed with another child, a son they named James. He was a surprise, unexpected but deeply welcome, and he brought new joy to their family. Beatrice and Zachary grew older together, their hair turning gray and their hands becoming rough from years of labor. But they never stopped loving each other. never took each other for granted. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the desert, still laughed at Tom Winter's old jokes, still kissed each other good morning and good night. Their love had not been the dramatic, explosive kind depicted in novels. It had been built slowly, day by day, through shared work and shared dreams, and the simple act of choosing each other over and over again. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the stable was settled for the night, Beatrice would think back to that terrible morning when her mother had accused her of theft. She would remember standing in that hallway in her nightgown, feeling her world collapse, believing her life was over. And then she would think about Zachary stepping out of the shadows, offering her hope when she had none, believing in her when no one else would. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary would ask, pulling her closer. "How lucky I am," Beatrice would say. "How all that pain and betrayal led me to you. How I would not change anything, even the hard parts, because they brought me here." "I am the lucky one," Zachary would insist. "I was just drifting through life, no purpose, no home. And then I found you. You gave me everything, Beatrice, a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning. You are my whole world." On their 20th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Beatrice with a gift. It was a silver locket, similar to the one her grandmother had owned, the one that had started all the trouble so many years ago. Inside, he had placed tiny photographs of their 3 children. "I know the locket brings back bad memories," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "But I wanted you to have something beautiful to replace the ugliness. This locket is not about lies and betrayal. It is about truth and love and the family we built together. Every time you wear it, I want you to remember that you survived, that you triumphed, that you created something wonderful from the ashes of your old life." Beatrice touched the locket, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For this, for everything. For being the man who proved my mother was a liar and then stayed to help me rebuild. For loving me when I felt unlovable. For giving me the family I always dreamed of." "Thank you for saying yes," Zachary said, kissing her softly. "Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with more dreams than sense. Thank you for building this life with me." They had 3 more decades together, 3 more decades of love and laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. They saw their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They expanded the stable into one of the most successful businesses in Fort Yuma. They weathered droughts and floods, economic downturns, and personal losses, always together, always supporting each other. When Beatrice was 72 years old, she fell ill with pneumonia. Zachary never left her side, holding her hand through the fever and the delirium, talking to her even when she could not respond. She recovered, but it took months, and she was never quite as strong as she had been before. Still, she refused to slow down, insisted on continuing to help with the books and the tack shop even when her hands shook and her breathing came hard. "I am not ready to stop living," she told Zachary when he suggested she rest more. "I am not ready to sit in a rocking chair and wait for death. I want to keep working, keep being useful, keep being part of this life we built together." So they continued on, side by side, until the day Zachary did not wake up. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, his hand still reaching for Beatrice across the bed. She held him and cried, and then she kissed his forehead one last time and called for their children. Beatrice lived another 5 years after Zachary's death, but she was never quite the same. She had lost her partner, her best friend, the man who had changed her entire life with his belief in her innocence. She missed him every moment of every day, but she took comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. She spent her final years telling stories about their life together, making sure the younger generations understood what their grandfather had done for her, how he had saved her from ruin and given her a reason to believe in love again. On a warm spring evening in 1921, Beatrice Zane passed away quietly in her sleep, surrounded by her family. She was 89 years old. They buried her next to Zachary in the small cemetery overlooking the Colorado River, and on her headstone they wrote, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she was accused wrongly, but loved truly. May she rest in the arms of the man who proved her innocence and won her heart." The stable continued to operate for another generation, run by William and then by his son, a testament to the hard work and love of the couple who had founded it. And though the years passed and memories faded, the story of Beatrice and Zachary lived on in family lore, passed down from parent to child. It became a legend in Fort Yuma, the story of the cowboy who believed in an accused woman when no one else would, who uncovered the truth and won a bride in the process. It was a reminder that love could bloom in the darkest moments, that truth would eventually prevail, and that sometimes the worst betrayals could lead to the greatest blessings. Because in the end, Beatrice Ramsey had been accused of being a thief by her own mother, and Zachary Zane had proved her mother was the liar. But more than that, he had given her a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a family that spanned generations. He had taken a frightened young woman standing alone in a hostile world and shown her that she was worthy of devotion, of partnership, of happiness. And she had loved him for it every day of her life, through all the hardships and joys, until death finally parted them and then reunited them in whatever lay beyond. Their love story became the stuff of legend, but for Beatrice and Zachary, it had simply been their life, lived day by day with honesty and integrity and an unwavering commitment to each other. They had faced down lies and betrayal and built something true and lasting in their place. They had created a legacy that would outlive them both, a testament to the power of believing in someone when everyone else had given up, and the transformative magic of love offered freely and accepted gratefully. And so their story ended not with tragedy or bitterness, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived and a love well earned. From the ashes of accusation and betrayal, they had built a dynasty of truth and devotion that would echo through the generations, a reminder that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, love could not only survive but flourish, growing strong and deep like the desert plants that drew life from seemingly barren ground. Their story was proof that the best revenge against those who wronged you was not hatred or bitterness, but the building of a beautiful life that rendered their betrayal meaningless. Beatrice had been broken by her mother's lies, but Zachary had helped her become whole again, and together they had created something neither could have achieved alone. That was the true miracle of their love, the real happy ending to their tale, and it lived on long after they were both gone, in the hearts of their descendants and in the stories told on warm desert evenings when families gathered to remember those who had come before.